Get ready for a jaw-dropping story. Subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss a thing, and stay tuned for more unbelievable true tales. The story unfolds in the meticulously planned community of Oak Haven Estates, a picture postcard neighborhood nestled in the heart of suburban America, somewhere in sunny California. It's the kind of place where lawns are perpetually emerald green, flower beds are meticulously weeded, and houses stand in neat, uniform rows, all adhering to a surprisingly strict aesthetic code. This code is enforced with an almost religious fervor by the Oak Haven Homeowners Association, HOA. And the self-appointed high priestess of this HOA, the enforcer-in-chief, is Karen Miller. Karen, a woman in her late 50s with a permanently pursed mouth and a wardrobe consisting primarily of beige cardigans and sensible shoes, is the bane of many Oak Haven residents' existence. She's the type of person who measures the height of her neighbors' hedges with a ruler and sends out passive-aggressive emails about improperly placed recycling bins. She sees herself as the guardian of Oak Haven's pristine image, a defender against the encroaching chaos of individuality and nonconformity. Across the street from Karen's perfectly symmetrical beige-painted house lives the Thompson family. Sarah Thompson is a single mother, fiercely independent and devoted to her 12-year-old son, Daniel. Daniel is a bright, imaginative boy with a quick wit and a love for video games and superheroes. He also has cerebral palsy, which affects his muscle control and coordination, requiring him to use a wheelchair for mobility. Daniel's wheelchair, a sleek, modern design with bright blue accents, is not just a medical device. It's his freedom, his means of exploring the world, and a symbol of his resilience. However, to Karen Miller, it's something else entirely. An eyesore, a violation, a constant thorn in her side. The conflict between Karen and the Thompsons began subtly. First, it was a complaint about Daniel's wheelchair being left on the front porch overnight. Karen's typed, single-spaced letter, slipped under Sarah's door, cited HOA Bylaw 6.2.4. All personal items must be stored out of sight when not in immediate use to maintain the uncluttered appearance of the community. Sarah, exhausted from a long day at work and caring for Daniel, initially dismissed it as petty. Then came the issue with the wheelchair ramp. Sarah had a contractor install a sturdy, well-built ramp leading up to the front door, making it easier for Daniel to enter and exit the house independently. Karen, of course, had something to say about this too. Another letter arrived, this time citing Bylaw 7.1.2. Any exterior modifications to property must be approved by the HOA Architectural Review Committee and must adhere to the established aesthetic guidelines of Oak Haven Estates. Karen claimed the ramp's natural wood finish clashed with the neighborhood's approved color palette, and demanded it be painted a more neutral shade, specifically referencing a color called desert sand. Sarah tried to reason with Karen. She invited her over for coffee, hoping to explain Daniel's needs and find some common ground. She even offered to compromise, suggesting she could stain the ramp a darker brown, although she secretly felt it was perfectly fine as it was. During the tense, brief meeting in Sarah's kitchen, Karen remained stiff and unyielding. She sipped her tea decaf with a single artificial sweetener, and listened to Sarah's explanations with a thinly veiled expression of disdain. "Rules are rules, Mrs. Thompson," she stated, her voice tight with disapproval. "The HOA exists to protect property values and maintain a consistent aesthetic. Your son's situation doesn't exempt you from these regulations." The meeting ended with no resolution, only a deepening chasm of resentment between the two women. The tension continued to escalate. Karen started taking pictures of Daniel's wheelchair whenever it was outside, documenting any perceived infraction. She'd call the HOA management company to report violations, even if Daniel was simply sitting in his chair on the sidewalk talking to friends. She'd glare at Daniel whenever she saw him, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Daniel, initially oblivious to Karen's animosity, started to notice. He'd catch her staring, her eyes narrowed, and he'd feel a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He started to feel self-conscious about his wheelchair, about his very presence in the neighborhood. One beautiful, sunny Saturday afternoon, Daniel was outside, practicing maneuvering his wheelchair. Sarah had created a small obstacle course for him on the sidewalk in front of their house, using some colorful cones and small, lightweight ramps. It was part of his physical therapy, designed to help him build strength and improve his coordination. Buddy, their golden retriever, lay nearby, panting happily and occasionally nudging Daniel's hand with his wet nose. Daniel was focused, determined, his tongue poking out in concentration as he navigated a particularly tricky turn. He was feeling proud of his progress, a small smile playing on his lips. Karen, returning from her daily rigorously scheduled power walk, during which she meticulously inspected every lawn and mailbox for potential HOA violations, spotted Daniel and his obstacle course. Her face immediately flushed crimson. In her mind, this wasn't a child engaging in therapeutic exercise, it was a deliberate, blatant and utterly unacceptable defiance of the HOA's rules. She saw the cones and ramps not as aids to Daniel's mobility, but as unauthorized obstructions and unapproved modifications to the common area. The simmering resentment she'd been harboring for months reached a boiling point. She marched towards Daniel, her sensible shoes clicking angrily on the pavement, a storm brewing in her eyes. She had her pepper spray ready to use. Sarah had made a crucial error. She was at the store, leaving her child unprotected from Karen's brewing rage. This was Karen's moment, her opportunity to finally put an end to what she considered a persistent and flagrant disregard for the rules of Oak Haven Estates. The stage was set for a confrontation, a clash between a boy's need for independence and a woman's obsession with control. Karen stormed towards Daniel, her face a mask of righteous fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice shrill enough to make Buddy whimper and back away. Daniel, startled, looked up, his eyes widening in alarm. He hadn't seen her approach, lost in his concentration. "I'm just practicing," he stammered, his hands instinctively tightening on the wheels of his chair. "Practicing? Practicing what? Defying the rules? Obstructing the sidewalk? Creating an eyesore?" Karen spat out each word like a venomous dart. She pointed a trembling finger at the cones and ramps. "This is a clear violation of HOA bylaws. I've warned your mother, and you just keep pushing it." Daniel, confused and frightened, tried to explain. "My mom said it was okay, it's for my therapy." But Karen wasn't listening. She was beyond reason, fueled by months of pent-up frustration and a deep-seated sense of entitlement. She pulled out a small, pink canister of pepper spray from her pocket, a self-defense tool she'd purchased after a neighborhood watch meeting, convinced that the world was a dangerous place filled with potential threats. "You need to learn a lesson," she hissed, her eyes narrowed to slits. "You need to understand that rules are rules." Before Daniel could react, before he could even fully comprehend what was happening, Karen aimed the pepper spray directly at his face and pressed the nozzle. A cloud of orange mist engulfed him, burning his eyes, his nose, his throat. He screamed, a high-pitched, agonizing sound that ripped through the quiet afternoon. He coughed violently, his body convulsing, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the burning chemicals. Buddy barked frantically, jumping up and down, torn between protecting his young master and his own fear of the enraged woman. The sound of Daniel's screams and Buddy's barking alerted some neighbors. Mr. Henderson, a retired police officer who lived next door to the Thompsons, came rushing out of his house, followed by his wife, Martha. Across the street, young Emily Carter, a teenager who often babysat Daniel, also heard the commotion and ran outside. They were met with a horrifying scene. Daniel, slumped in his wheelchair, gasping for air and clutching his face, and Karen standing over him, the pepper spray canister still in her hand, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. "What have you done?" Mr. Henderson roared, his face turning red with anger. He immediately recognized the situation and rushed to Daniel's side, gently trying to assess the damage. Martha, a retired nurse, grabbed a garden hose and began to carefully rinse Daniel's face with water, trying to dilute the pepper spray. Emily, meanwhile, dialed 911, her hands shaking as she reported the assault. Karen, initially unfazed, started to backpedal as more neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the chaos. She tried to justify her actions, her voice now laced with a hint of panic. "He was violating the rules. He wouldn't listen. I had to defend myself." Her claims of self-defense were met with disbelief and outrage. "Defend yourself against a disabled child?" Mr. Henderson bellowed. "You're a monster." The arrival of the police and paramedics added to the pandemonium. Daniel, still coughing and crying, was carefully lifted onto a stretcher and taken to the ambulance. The paramedics treated his burning eyes and respiratory distress, their faces grim. The police officers, after taking statements from witnesses, approached Karen. Her initial defiance crumbled as she was read her Miranda rights, the reality of her situation sinking in. She was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car, her face now pale and drawn, the smugness replaced with a dawning horror. The neighbors, a mixture of anger, shock and disbelief, watched as she was driven away, the silence of Oak Haven Estates shattered by the echoes of a child's screams and the harsh clang of handcuffs. The perfect facade had been ripped away, revealing a dark undercurrent of intolerance and cruelty. The incident instantly became the talk of the neighborhood, and soon the entire town as news of the HOA Karen, who pepper-sprayed a disabled child, spread like wildfire. The aftermath of Karen Miller's assault on Daniel Thompson unfolded with the speed and ferocity of a social media wildfire. The catalyst was, of course, the video captured by Emily Carter, the quick-thinking teenage babysitter. Emily, still shaken by what she'd witnessed, initially sent the video to a private group chat with her closest friends, seeking their comfort and advice. "Can you believe this happened?" she typed, her fingers still trembling. "I'm so scared for Daniel." Her friends, equally horrified, urged her to report the incident to the police, which she had already done. But one friend, a slightly more tech-savvy individual named Jessica, suggested something else. "Emily, you need to post this online. People need to see this." Hesitantly, Emily agreed. She first posted the video on her personal Facebook page, making it public, and adding a brief description of what had happened. Within minutes, the video had garnered dozens of views and comments. People were shocked, outraged, and demanding justice for Daniel. From there, it spread like a digital contagion. Someone copied the video and posted it on a local community Facebook group dedicated to Oak Haven Estates. That's where it truly exploded. The comments section became a battleground, with residents expressing their disgust at Karen's actions and their support for the Thompson family. The video then jumped platforms. Someone uploaded it to Twitter, adding the hashtag #HOA Karen. Within hours, the hashtag was trending nationwide. The concise, easily digestible nature of Twitter, combined with the visually shocking content of the video, made it perfect for viral spread. Retweets and quote tweets amplified the message, reaching millions of users. Celebrities, known for their social activism, picked up the story. Actress and disability advocate Marlee Matlin tweeted, "This is horrifying. We must stand up against ableism and hate. #HOA Karen must be held accountable." Her tweet alone garnered tens of thousands of retweets and likes. The story then moved to Reddit, appearing on multiple subreddits, including r/publicfreakout, r/I am a total piece of shit, and r/justice served. Redditors, known for their investigative prowess, began digging into Karen Miller's background, uncovering past instances of her harassing neighbors and her obsessive adherence to HOA bylaws. They found her LinkedIn profile. She worked as an accountant for a small firm, her Facebook page filled with pictures of her meticulously organized home and complaints about minor neighborhood infractions, and even her Yelp reviews, where she consistently gave one-star ratings to businesses that didn't meet her exacting standards. The viral outrage wasn't limited to the English-speaking world. The video, with its universally understandable theme of injustice and cruelty, transcended language barriers. It appeared on social media platforms in other countries, sparking similar outrage and condemnation. News outlets, both traditional and online, picked up the story. Local television stations ran segments featuring interviews with Sarah Thompson and shocked neighbors. National news networks like CNN and Fox News covered the story, further amplifying its reach. Headlines screamed variations of HOA Karen pepper sprays disabled child over wheelchair, and viral video sparks outrage against HOA tyranny. The district attorney Robert Johnson, a man acutely aware of public opinion and his upcoming re-election campaign, found himself thrust into the center of a national media storm. His office was flooded with calls, emails, and social media messages demanding justice for Daniel. Johnson, a seasoned politician, knew he had to act decisively. He held a press conference, standing in front of a backdrop of American flags and somber-faced law enforcement officials. "The actions of Karen Miller are reprehensible and will not be tolerated," he declared, his voice resonating with righteous indignation. "We are committed to ensuring that justice is served swiftly and fairly." Initially, Karen had been charged with misdemeanor assault. However, given the overwhelming public pressure, the severity of the attack, and the fact that pepper spray could be considered a dangerous weapon, the charges were upgraded. She now faced felony assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, and potentially hate crime enhancements due to Daniel's disability. The legal ramifications were becoming increasingly severe. Sarah Thompson, still reeling from the trauma of seeing her son attacked, was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. She received messages of encouragement from strangers around the world. People offered to donate money, send gifts to Daniel, and even organize protests outside Karen's house. While grateful for the support, Sarah's primary focus was on Daniel's recovery and ensuring that Karen faced the full consequences of her actions. She hired Angela Davis, a highly respected civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on tough cases and winning. Angela, a woman with a steely gaze and a commanding presence, immediately saw the potential for this case to set a precedent. It wasn't just about one incident, it was about systemic ableism and the abuse of power by HOAs. Angela filed a sweeping civil lawsuit, naming Karen Miller, the Oak Haven HOA, and the HOA's management company as defendants. The lawsuit alleged a litany of offenses, including assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, and multiple violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA). The lawsuit sought significant monetary damages, not just to compensate Daniel for his physical and emotional trauma, but also to punish the defendants and deter similar behavior in the future. It was a bold move designed to hold not just Karen, but the entire system that enabled her accountable. The Oak Haven HOA, facing a public relations catastrophe and the threat of financial ruin, quickly distanced itself from Karen. Their attempts to portray her as a rogue actor were largely unsuccessful. The public saw through their self-serving statements and demanded more substantive action. The HOA's management company, fearing a loss of business, terminated its contract with Oak Haven Estates, leaving the community in a state of administrative limbo. Karen, meanwhile, was increasingly isolated. Her lawyer, a public defender named Mark Peterson, a man who looked perpetually tired and overwhelmed, advised her to remain silent and avoid any public appearances or statements. But the damage was irreversible. Karen Miller had become a national symbol of intolerance and cruelty, her life irrevocably altered by her own actions and the power of the internet to amplify them. The gears of justice, both legal and social, were grinding relentlessly, and she was caught in their machinery. The legal proceedings against Karen Miller unfolded over several months, each development meticulously scrutinized by the media and the public. The district attorney, Robert Johnson, driven by both a genuine sense of justice and the political pressure of the upcoming election, pursued the case aggressively. He presented a strong case, built on the overwhelming evidence: the viral video, eyewitness testimony, Daniel's medical records, and Karen's own history of harassing the Thompson family. Karen's defense attorney, Mark Peterson, the overworked public defender, attempted to paint her as a well-meaning, albeit overly zealous, enforcer of HOA rules, a woman who had simply snapped under pressure. He argued that she had never intended to seriously harm Daniel and that her actions were a misguided attempt to maintain order in the community. He even tried to introduce the idea that Daniel's wheelchair movements were somehow provocative, a tactic that backfired spectacularly, further enraging the public and solidifying Karen's image as utterly lacking in empathy. The prosecution, however, presented a compelling counter-narrative. They portrayed Karen as a bully, a woman driven by a need for control and a deep-seated prejudice against people with disabilities. They highlighted her repeated complaints about Daniel's wheelchair, her dismissive attitude towards Sarah's explanations, and her use of pepper spray, a weapon, against a defenseless child. They called expert witnesses to testify about the physical and psychological effects of pepper spray, particularly on children. The trial culminated in a dramatic courtroom scene. Daniel, accompanied by his mother and their lawyer Angela Davis, bravely took the stand. He recounted the events of that day in a clear, steady voice, his testimony both heartbreaking and inspiring. He described the burning sensation, the fear, and the lasting emotional trauma he had experienced. He also spoke about his love for his community, his desire to feel safe and accepted, and his hope that no other child would have to endure what he had gone through. The jury, visibly moved by Daniel's testimony and the overwhelming evidence, deliberated for only a few hours before returning a verdict: guilty on all counts. Karen Miller, her face pale and drawn, showed little emotion as the verdict was read. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and applause. Sarah Thompson hugged her son tightly, tears streaming down her face. It was a moment of vindication not just for Daniel but for everyone who had been following the case and rooting for justice. The judge, a stern but fair woman named Judge Patricia Ramirez, sentenced Karen to a combination of jail time, probation, mandatory community service, specifically at a disability rights organization, and extensive anger management therapy. She also ordered Karen to pay substantial restitution to the Thompson family, covering Daniel's medical expenses, therapy costs, and pain and suffering. The judge delivered a powerful statement, emphasizing the importance of tolerance, empathy, and the protection of vulnerable members of society. "Your actions, Ms. Miller," she said, "were not just a violation of the law, they were a violation of basic human decency." The civil lawsuit brought by Angela Davis against Karen, the Oak Haven HOA, and the management company was settled out of court for a significant, undisclosed amount. The settlement included not only financial compensation but also sweeping reforms to the HOA's bylaws and procedures. The HOA was required to undergo mandatory disability awareness training, revise its rules to be fully compliant with the ADA, and establish a clear and transparent process for handling complaints and disputes. The management company, eager to avoid further reputational damage, agreed to implement similar training programs for all of its employees and to review its contracts with other HOAs to ensure ADA compliance. The HOA Karen case became a landmark legal precedent, cited in numerous subsequent cases involving HOA disputes and disability discrimination. It sent a clear message that HOAs could not operate with impunity and that the rights of people with disabilities must be respected. The case also sparked a broader national conversation about the overreach of HOAs and the need for greater accountability and transparency in their operations. Several states introduced legislation aimed at reforming HOA laws, making it easier for homeowners to challenge unreasonable rules and regulations. Daniel, though initially traumatized by the incident, gradually healed with the support of his mother, his friends, and a therapist specializing in childhood trauma. He became an advocate for disability rights, speaking at schools and community events, sharing his story and inspiring others. He even started a YouTube channel where he documented his recovery, showcased his wheelchair skills, and promoted inclusivity. He became a symbol of resilience and hope. The community of Oak Haven Estates underwent a significant transformation. The old HOA board was replaced with a new, more diverse group of residents committed to fostering a welcoming and inclusive environment. The overly restrictive bylaws were revised, and a greater emphasis was placed on community building and mutual respect. The pepper spray incident, though a dark chapter in the community's history, ultimately led to positive change, fostering a stronger, more compassionate, and more inclusive neighborhood. Karen Miller, after serving her time, moved away, disappearing from public view, forever marked by the consequences of her actions. The story of the HOA Karen served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that prejudice and intolerance have no place in a just and equitable society, and that even the smallest act of kindness and understanding can make a world of difference. What did you think of Karen's ultimate fate? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more shocking stories.